Now, you might not care about baseball, but this week, the impossible happened. There was actually an article written on some statistical analysis as to whether the Minnesota Twins could get any worse. No, I'm serious. That they did some statistical analysis on the playoff losing streak that the Minnesota Twins were on that dates back to 2004? Am I right? 2003? 2002 as well. Anyway, they did some statistical analysis and they found that it was nearly impossible that you would lose every single playoff game for the last 20 or so years. I'm serious. They said the probability of that was really, really impossible. Now, I bring this up for a point, okay? I bring this up for a point. Today we're going to be talking about the impossible. And with that, we're going to be addressing the attitude and the feelings or the lack of confidence that comes along with expectations that have been reduced, that have been diminished when a series of events occurs or experiences in life cause you to think, well, that's never going to happen. Which is exactly where I was on Tuesday and Wednesday. To the point that I was like, do I even want to watch? I don't want to be let down again. When's the last time it doesn't have to be baseball. I mean, I hope it's not baseball for you guys. When's the last time you thought, well, that's just impossible? Some of you are like, yesterday or this morning. When's the last time you thought to yourself, well, I've been let down before, so I'm not going to have any expectations because it's never going to happen? Oh, yes. I want you to go with me to Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29. Now, I started a little bit lighthearted there. That's just baseball. I started a bit lighthearted there because we're going to get into a pretty heavy subject, and we have a lot to cover. Mark chapter 9, starting at verse 14, is the story of Jesus' healing of a boy with an unclean spirit. Jesus' healing of a boy with an evil spirit. Okay, so it's a very heavy subject, and you'll get why in a bit, why we're talking about the impossible today. But I want to take you there, and I'm going to go through it verse by verse, and we're going to look at this account in the Gospel of Mark, and what it has to do with our series, Greater Things. Today we're going to talk about impossible things. Reading in Jesus' name. Are you there? You ready? It says, and when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him, that's Jesus, and greeted him. And he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. Now get this, verse 18. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams, and he grinds his teeth, and he becomes rigid. You can imagine with me. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. That's what this argument is about. Our story begins with an argument, which is classic. You got scribes and you got the disciples. Now, what are they arguing about? We're not told exactly, but we're given some more information at the end of the story. And so that we can conclude it's pretty likely, because of who was arguing, that they were talking about likely the methodology of the way they prayed. What I mean by that is they're going back and forth on well, you guys weren't trained with the same school of thought I was trained in. You guys are just common folk. You guys don't understand that you are doing it all wrong. Maybe they were arguing about the type of prayer that was prayed. Maybe they're arguing about the way they laid down their hands on the boy. We're not told exactly. But we know they were arguing. And here's the irony of it all. You have a boy with an unclean spirit. A boy that is being destroyed by the enemy. And you got the scribes and the disciples arguing about piddly little things. Now, let's not look past this kind of attitude in the church and think to ourselves, we would never do that. There are ministries, you can find them all over the internet. I don't even know if I'd call them ministries. I'm serious. There are ministries, if you will call them that are there for the very purpose of just making sure that everyone knows how bad every other ministry is, how bad churches are, what they're doing not right, what they're doing inaccurately. Now, some of that is a good thing. Not all of it's bad. But I hope that when we come to a text like this and we see what's going on in Jesus' day, that we will look in the mirror a bit ourselves and say, where is our focus? You got people who need the kingdom of God. And let's just be blunt about it. We have people dying every day going to hell. And we're worried about methodology. We need to check our own hearts. We start heavy because they start with this argument. I was talking with a missionary, and this is just last week, and he was telling me that he has been involved in this ministry overseas where they're making disciples, and they're really just empowering everyday, regular people, untrained in some capacity, and they're training them to go and plant churches. Now the reason that I bring it up is it's semi-controversial to just send people out to plant churches when they haven't been trained. Now, the point isn't that they haven't been trained at all, but he's got a little bit of flack for sending people out, common folk, out to, go and plant churches when they haven't been trained the way they should be trained. And I'm thinking to myself, there is a need. I hope we can find some middle ground on this. There's a place for that training. But I have a feeling the scribes and the disciples are probably arguing about this. When we need to plant churches, and we need to disciple people, and we need to usher people into the kingdom. Do you see where I'm going with that? And so I start that way to say all those things, to say, my 2 cents on that is, we have a world in need, and we need to be focused. Now, Jesus responds to the argument, and we see this in verse 19, and this is really where we pick things up. It says, and he answered them. He answered their argument. And he stepped into their argument. And look what Jesus said. Now, they essentially are asking Jesus, why didn't this work? And this is what Jesus says. Look with me at verse 19. And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." What Jesus is really saying is, do I have to hold your hand in everything? Trust me. See, a faithless generation is one that will not just trust the obvious truth of God's word for their lives. Instead, they will depend upon their own ideas and dogmas and lofty opinions and theories and conclusions. Do you see the difference? Jesus is standing before them, and they're arguing about who's right. Bring him to me. If you're sensing a little frustration in Jesus' voice, I think that's true. I think there is a righteous, holy frustration in what he's saying. Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. Jesus picks up the pieces, so to speak. And that's what he's doing in all of our lives. Right? You walked into here and you think you have it all together. I think I have it all together. We walk into worship. We hope to get fed a little bit. We're going to go home and we're going to maybe apply a little bit of it. And we think we're the best thing since sliced bread for the kingdom of God. And the truth of the matter is that Jesus is always picking up the pieces for us. Like we make an effort this way or that, and we say, look what we did. Look what we did. We are amazing. I'm so glad that God has me. That sort of thing. And the truth of the matter is, he doesn't need us, but he wants us, and he loves us. We get to be a part of his work. But boy, he's picking up the pieces a lot, isn't he? A lot. But that's the grace of God. We just sang about the grace of God. What is that? It's his loving kindness that never ends. It's steadfast. Grace it's not even a great English word for what it really means in both the Old and New Testaments. That he would lavish his love upon you despite always having to pick up the pieces. That's what he's doing here in the story. Let's move on. Of course, Mark 9:20, as I just read, bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And look what happens. And when the spirit saw him, the evil spirit, immediately it convulsed the boy. And he fell on the ground and he rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? Which is an interesting question to ask in the middle of this. How long has this been happening to him? And then we just see the issue at hand. He said from childhood. I can't remember how long we've been dealing with this. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. Now, I don't know what comes to mind when you read a story like this one in the Bible, but let me talk about something that maybe we don't talk about each week. Let's talk about exorcism. Seriously. Let's talk about what we believe, what we think about when it comes to evil spirits and demons. For some of us, we might see a situation like this as something that only happens in certain parts of the world, or only back in Bible times, or only in really extreme situations. But let me just speak for it for a moment. Evil like this in some parts of the world may be more out in the open, or we could say on the surface. But that doesn't mean the enemy is not at work, or that evil or sin or demons are not real. It's just that here in our society, evil like this exists and shows itself in a different way. I think of it this way. I mean, if Satan can convince someone that evil doesn't exist, that sin doesn't exist, that this sort of stuff is just kind of far out there and not really real, and stuff that we joke around about at the end of October. If he can get us to think that, then the foothold's already there. Wouldn't you agree? Oh, we have to be careful. Oh, we have to be careful. Oh, we have to be informed. Oh, we cannot take lightly what is going on here. 2 Corinthians 4:4. It says, in their case, this is what happens. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbeliever to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. That there's a blindness to both good and evil in our world. That's how twisted our world is. So again, after the man tells Jesus what the evil spirit does to the boy, he asks Jesus for help. He goes to the right place. He does the right thing, so to speak. But look what happens next in verse 23. Let me read it for you. I'll go back one verse before that. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can. Now there isn't a question mark there. But I want you to think about what he's saying. If you can, all things are possible for one who believes. What Jesus is pointing out is the man's if. If you can. That's what Jesus wants us to see. That's what Mark is showing us in this story. This is the part that has to do with our faith. If you can. What's your if today? Really? What's your if today? I mean, like, if you can do this, God, if you can do this, I'll use whatever help I can get. Just kind of a faithless prayer. Or, if you can do this, God, I promise I will go wherever you want me to go. As if somehow there is an obstacle that is keeping you from doing the Lord's will. But we do it, and it shows a lack of faith. Lord, if you can change my son or daughter, if you can change my wife, come on, husbands. If you can change my husband, come on, wives. If you can change my grandchild, then I'll really believe. What's your if today? Now, secondly, Jesus is stating once again that our faith plays a critical role, a key role in the outcome of what happens in our life. I'm going to say that again for the Lutherans in the building. You got that. I'm glad you did. Jesus is stating once again that our faith plays a key role in the outcome of what happens in our lives. Now, what do I mean by that? It's important to note that what Jesus is getting at here is the object of our belief. It's not necessarily the strength of our faith and trust and belief that determines the outcome of our prayers, as if God can be manipulated, that sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying that, but we have to recognize that God calls us to pray. He calls us to interact. He calls us to be obedient. And so there is something that God requires on our part from the point, not from our salvation, not even for our sanctification, but to the point that He is doing something in our lives and wants us to grow and believe for greater things. This is the key. This is how it relates to the whole sermon series where we're talking about, hey, if you don't believe God is greater than your circumstances, and if you're struggling to believe that God is greater than the evil we are seeing in the world, then what do we believe? Because the Bible is clear that He is greater and that He has already accomplished what He seeks to accomplish, and everything He is doing is working to will His great glory in this world. And we don't understand it, but it draws us to Him. I don't get what's going on in the Middle East right now today, but I tell you what I'm not oblivious to. It is not just something physical. There is something happening that is of the spiritual realm. There is a spiritual war at stake. And here's the other thing that it tells me. It tells me that we are so in need of crying out to the Lord that He would return as we pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, that is mostly for another sermon, but I had to make mention of that because of obviously, clearly what is going on in the news today. And going on for so many of our loved ones in Israel. Yes, it's important to note that what Jesus is getting at here is the object of our belief. Another way of saying it, He's not saying you can do whatever you want if you put your mind to it. How many times have you heard that? That's not really what He's saying. He's saying all that is possible only through me. And that's what we want to be believing for. It says in verse 24 as I continue, you still with me? Immediately the father of the child cried out. So what he had said, now he is realizing what he is saying, and he is responding what Jesus says to him. The father immediately cries out, I believe. Famous quote. Help my what? My unbelief. Yes, doubt and faith can coexist. Yes, we do believe and have faith, and yet we deal with limitations within our faith. I picture it this way. You have a crisis in your life. You have a hope. You have a dream. And you're believing for that. But then you think about what's happened in the past or what you've gone through. You're thinking about the reality of the natural world we live in, or the limitations health-wise or finance-wise. Boy, that gets to us, doesn't it? How often we think, well, it does cost a lot of money. I don't know if God can do that. And we think about these limitations and we place our limitations on God, and then all of a sudden we say, you know what, I don't want to be let down. I just don't think that will ever happen. What is our prayer? It's in times like that we must cry out just like this man. Help my unbelief. God wants that prayer for us. God wants us praying that prayer. Help my unbelief. See, God knows you doubt. Just because you don't bring it up at church with your friends doesn't mean you don't doubt. God knows your doubts. God knows what you're thinking right now. Hopefully it's nice things. He knows your doubts. Verse 24. Immediately the father of the child cries out and says, I believe, help my unbelief. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, you mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. What Jesus is going to do is final. It is complete. I love that. And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, you can picture with me, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Yes, he's delivered. He's delivered. Jesus is Lord of both the physical and the spiritual. This is the sign, right? The miracles are more than just, so much more than just attention getters. So much more than just the display of God at work in the world as He is. Hope you believe that. No, it's a sign of what is to come. As the boy rises, it's a sign of what is to come, that there is no power at work that He cannot conquer, both in our lives and in this world. Now notice what happens next, though. It seems a bit inconsequential to the story as a whole, and yet it is certainly not. What happens next? And when he had entered the house, the boy is delivered. Hopefully there's cheering in the streets, amazement. And then they retreat from the crowds and they go into the house privately. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked Jesus privately, why could we not cast it out? Now, we can take that a couple of different ways. Like, where is the disciples' focus in this? Like, they just saw someone healed, and they're still wondering why they couldn't do it. It might show us something. But nevertheless, an important teaching point, and very, very important to the story. It's why Mark gives us this detail. Why could we not cast it out? And he said to them, hear this, church, this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer. Now, much has been written about what this means exactly. But I can only conclude three things, and I say this in closing. First, some versions say prayer and fasting. Prayer and fasting. In other words, like focused prayer. And it's possible that that's what it is saying. As if to say, this can only be cast out by intensive and focused prayer. And it could mean that, along with other things. Secondly, either way, Jesus' response is said within a context of Him teaching the disciples that all things are possible in and through Him. So we could say that this kind of issue could only be cast out by prayer in the name of Jesus with full trust and faith in Him alone. But there's a third thing, because it really could be both of those things. Let's look up here just for a moment. We're talking about physical impossibilities here. This is a spiritual matter. What's going on in this boy's life is a spiritual war. What's going on in our world is something spiritual too. God doesn't separate the physical and the spiritual. We do that. He doesn't. Therefore, what Jesus is really likely saying, along with these other things, is, no, you have to attack this spiritually because it's spiritual. But you're all caught up in the physical, in the momentary, rather than in the eternal. What he's really saying, church, is you need to be committed to approaching everything in and through me, because I am the only way through the spiritual war. I am the only victory within this issue. There is no power that you possess, nor can you even see what's going on in the spiritual realm. This is why it requires prayer. Stop worrying. Stop thinking about all the methodology that will lead you to the place where you'll finally have victory. Leave it aside and bring it to Jesus. Here's what I want us to do as a church as we go from here. And why don't you just bow your heads just for a moment here and just receive this. It's a bit of some marching orders for us as a church, but it's also just a prayer that I'm going to commit to praying over us before we go. It's this. Church, I want us, just bow your heads just for a moment, just to focus. I want us to commit to 7 days of prayer. Specifically, praying for that which is going on in the spiritual realm. Whether it's about the things that are going on in our world today, in our news, in the Middle East. We recognize these things are not just physical, they're spiritual, and we should attack them that way. And so I want us to commit to 7 days of going before the Lord once a day, at least once a day, no less than once a day. And I want us to consider praying that God's will would be done within the spiritual realm. Now, this is what this could look like. It looks like this, a prayer like this. God, what do you want me to know about the situation that we are in, that I am in, that the world is in? And then I want you to wait. I want you to wait for that answer. Even if it's beyond 7 days. Lord, what do you want me to know about things I cannot see, the things I do not fully understand? And then, when He answers, I want you to be obedient by praying, what should I do? And we're going to pray this both for ourselves, spiritually speaking, and for our church corporately. So let me do that now. Heavenly Father, what do you want us, Emmaus, to know about what's going on in our world today? About what's going on in my life, spiritually? Because I can't see it, God. What do you want me to know? Lord, I give it to you. And I ask that you would come in, that you would heal my heart. I give it to you. I release it to you. And I pray, Lord, that I would have the faith that when you answer, I would respond in faith. Just trust in you. And that I would ask, what then should I do? What then should we do? And we would again, in turn, respond in faith and trust in you. Lord, that is our prayer. I pray for this moment that we share together as we close the service, for those who are going through some things that they need healing for. And I pray it, Lord, for whatever the outcome of what happens all around our world and what you're calling us as a church to be about. And so, Lord, I pray that you would help our unbelief, that you would step into this place, and that you would work in and through us for your kingdom. Amen.